Greetings and welcome back. Once again, this is Dr. David Matthew Walton, now Assistant Professor of History and Inaugural Director of Global Black Studies at Western Carolina University. And this is Introduction to African American History, Part 2. Sorry for the delay. Oh, I'm messing up. Let me see. I got to get the right screen. Awesome. Hopefully, we have the right screen. So, this is part two. Part one was pre colonial and European contact Africa. Pre colonial and pre European contact Africa. And we discussed the birth of modern man and civilizations in pre colonial and pre European contact Africa. Now, we begin part two with African worldview. The African worldview at the time, pre-colonial, pre-European contact Africa. So we get a sense of what that African worldview was at that moment of European contact in Africa. The moment that trade began with sub-Saharan Africa, and then the early moments of what would create the transatlantic slave trade in the African diaspora in the Americas and Atlantic world more broadly. So that is why it's important. The first thing we need to understand is that this is a composite. This is a composite where we're trying to make sense and find common themes, common threads involving thousands of societies, cultures, worldviews. So this is a boiled down look at it to get a general sense. Why? Because we will discover that enslaved Africans in the Americas, in the Atlantic world, came from all over Africa, and those multitudes of cultures greatly impacted the development of African diasporic cultures, and more specifically to these lectures, African American cultures, plural. Now, we run the risk of being essentialists. So that's why I gave the disclaimer, and I will take on the burden and be very careful not to essentialize these cultures and not to be essentialists by trying to oversimplify. Although to some degree, some essentialization has to occur for this approach. But keep in mind, this is just broad concepts that we see in many, if not most, African cultures at the time. First, everything was viewed through the lens of spirituality. Well, what does that mean? Well, today in the United States of America, and those of us that come from Western civilizations, Western societies, right? Although I'm African American, I was born in the United States of America, as was my forefathers on both sides of my parents' genealogy and lineage. However, I am an American. Much of American culture impacts me and helps to shape my worldview, right? And our worldview. However, we operate under the notion of separation of church and state. We operate under a worldview where religion and the state should be separate, right? Some people can test that, but our society operates on that premise, the separation of church and state. And many debate what that means on many levels. That's not the purpose of this discussion here, though, right? But so it may be hard for you to grasp a society where government, religion, and science operate out of the same ideology, intertwined ideology. They're not separate, right? And society is organized in a way where they are not separate, right? And to expand it, because, there are definitions. So there's the definition of, well, what is a religion, right? And this isn't a discussion of that. So a more broader and perhaps more accurate term might be spirituality, right? So everything is viewed through the lenses of spirituality, right? That includes the foundational building block to every society, and that is socialization, right? And during this time, because where science was at the time, science wasn't then what it is today. Today we have things like in vitro fertilization. We have surrogate uh, birthing, carrying to term and birthing of children for a different set of parents, right? We have those scientific capabilities. Uh, we have other leaps in science that didn't exist in the world at the time. So the only way a society could continue itself, could perpetuate itself, right, to propagate itself, was first and fundamentally through childbirth, sex between a man and a woman. So the foundational building block for societies were family in the context of parents reproducing children. Various societies had various different forms of what configured families, but the foundational building block was the reproduction of man and woman, of humanity, I should say, the reproduction of humanity through sexual relationships, right? Though that was viewed through the lenses of spirituality. You had concepts, right, of when things were appropriate and not appropriate. And they were dictated to a large degree through spirituality, like many of us do with our religions today in the West, particularly of the Abrahamic faith. So if a mate was qualified or desirable to be married to your child, right, this was dictated through the lenses of spirituality. In most societies, young men and the representatives of their family, the older men, would approach the men, the father, and whatever proper structures for that society would be in that community. Uh, so it might be the chief as well as the father. So not just the eldest uh, male of the family, of the clan, the father of the daughter, of the young lady, I should say, and perhaps including the chief. And other elder men would attend. And they would petition. They would petition for, on behalf of the young man in their clan and that community, for uh, the young lady's hand in marriage. And it would come with it a negotiation of lobola. Some people will call it bride's price. There's many ways to analyze it. There are strong feminist critiques of it. Uh, and then there's also other economic applications as well, or analyses on the young man had to demonstrate the ability to take care of a wife, be it first wife, and then for societies that allow for polygamy, additional wives, to demonstrate the ability to provide for them and the children that they will produce together. Uh, but then there's also, you know, as revealed through feminist critiques, perhaps the suppression of women's rights in many cases, not perhaps, but the suppression of women's rights in many cases. You can almost relate it and not to be derogatory, but just to show the pain that could have been created, as well as the way some have analyzed it on, selling their daughters. So horse trading, for lack of a better way to put it, right on, just as we see happen from the perspective of European royal elites of, of the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, right? Even today, and people are enamored with the different intrigues and decisions and politics that goes into uh, marrying and getting the authorization and permission and the bride's price and all of the various things, right? However, spiritual considerations, perhaps there's a high miscarriage rate in that family. And if they're not within the same community, then if they're from a neighboring community, from within that community, could serve as a problem, right? And viewed through the lenses of spirituality, well, what is going on? Why? Why are they having so many miscarriages? Or maybe their gender ratio is off, right? So you say, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? They're not producing enough boys and girls to sustain their community. There is an imbalance, perhaps more boys than girls at a large amount, or vice versa, right? That it's unsustainable. There's a problem. Why would we be out of this balance, right? Analyzing it through the lenses of spirituality, right? Perhaps those families or that community has demonstrated to be out of step with the spiritual beliefs and worldview of that family that is considering a marriage or that community, right? And it will be analyzed through the lenses of spirituality. Why, right? And we'll talk more about that later. Politics, right? Viewed through the lenses of spirituality, right? How leadership is established in the community, in the culture, in the society, right? That is viewed through the lenses of spirituality, right? So spiritual considerations and spiritual structures were built into these societies in the determination of who would be qualified and how to be a leader or in important positions for the community, and who and how they come to a decision, and how a decision is deemed, how they are given the authority to make that decision on behalf of others, right? Who we will ally ourselves with other communities, right? Who we align ourselves with in times of war or in times of peace. But in times of peace, will we go to war, in support of this other community? Will we align ourselves with that type of pact where we are expected to? Those notions of politics and how politics operates, right, were viewed and evaluated through the lenses of spirituality, right? Changes to those political structures, right? Evolutions to those political structures, right? Viewed through the lenses of spirituality. Economics, right? We'll start with something, because these aren't mutually exclusive, they're actually interrelated. So we'll start with something that's directly linked to politics and also directly linked to socialization, but it's, squarely in the realm of economics on who we will trade with, right? That's definitely political. Who we will trade with. Those same considerations, right? For if it's a marriage consideration between different communities, right? Would apply in politics on will we ally with these people? And then there's also, right, will we trade with these people? Will we accept their goods? Would be really a strong consideration a little bit stronger than will we trade our goods to them, right? But spiritual considerations nonetheless. By accepting their goods, are their goods spiritually impure? Will we be bringing in harm and danger on the spiritual level, in the spiritual realm, right? Imbalance into our communities? You say, well, what do you mean? Mode of production will be linked to economics, right? And this is linked to socialization on how what is important in the community, right? How do things rank? How is the culture then constructed? Mode of production impacts that greatly, right? But it's an economic consideration as well, right? Squarely in that in many ways, right? What is an appropriate mode of production for the community is viewed through the lenses of spirituality. What is not is viewed through the lenses of spirituality. For example, the decision to be a miner, to be a mining community or not be a mining community, viewed through the lenses of spirituality. A hunter, a hunting community, a pastoral community, meaning raising livestock, an agricultural society. Those decisions and then the carrying out of the mode of production will be determined and viewed through the lenses of spirituality, right? Militarization, when to go to war, when not to go to war, right? Who to go with, who to go to war with and against, right? With as in an ally. We recruit them as allies, or they recruit us and we support them as allies in the military action against someone else, right? All of those things. How the community adapts to the war effort. Militarization is broad. Will it mean people will have to serve different roles in the culture, in the community, while others are away engaged in combat, right? How does that impact society? How does that impact culture, right? Through the lenses of spirituality. So you have developed within cultures across the world, frankly, although we're talking about Africa, of rites, R-I-T-E-S, rites and rituals. And we still participate here in the West in rites and in rituals, right? Spiritually or religious rites and rituals, right? People get baptized, people get christened, people take Holy Communion, right? Those are rites and rituals, right? Certain holidays or holy days, right? We practice in rites and rituals, right? Also, in the secular world, things like what you do at graduation from high school or college, and etc. What you wear, how we line up and walk, how we move our tassel. Those are rites and rituals, right? We participate in these things. So it's nothing that makes it less or demeaning, right? It's the white supremacy that when we discuss it in terms of Africa, we put it in this realm of inferiority, exoticism, and paganism, right? And technically, I guess if it's non-Abrahamic faith, it's paganism, but the negative connotations of what that means or implies, I should say, right? So they'll have rites and rituals that determine successful completion, right? So it was also the base of education, right? For many societies, many cultures, right? So you had initiation school, right? And usually they were separated by gender, particularly those who had more clearly defined gender roles, because those separate genders would get the education, the base rudimentary education, one, to be a successful citizen of the community. So that civic education, of the values and mores and appropriatenesses and operations within the society, that general civic education, how to do things in that society, right? That basic rudimentary, right? They would give vocational education, at the very least a rudimentary one, to what? Position them then to be evaluated to determine which specialized next initiation school, if their society had those, that they would be trained in, right? So that vocational education, right? To what? To support the mode of production for society, right? Also, you will have those same things to determine people who could successfully be in positions of leadership. The stamp of approval or their validation or authority came from spiritual considerations, right? So they would too have to complete rites and rituals, and the unsuccessful completion would disqualify them from being able to serve the community in that capacity, right? So you had, uh, depending on modes of productions, you had rites and rituals that were performed, right? So if mining was deemed unbalanced spiritually, unacceptable spiritually, right, for that community, right? But then they were forced, a great societal change occurred, and they were forced to trade for goods that had the products of mining in it, that they may not have traded for or used in their society because it will be bringing in the impurity, right? But things have changed, societal change, shift, right? So what? To then be able to make it acceptable, changes in rites and rituals, perhaps the creation of new rites and rituals, if nothing else, then to what? Cleanse those goods and cleanse the community for engaging in activities by trading for those goods in a process that was deemed at one time unacceptable, right? So you say, well, what is spirituality in the concept of this general African context, right? So you have four elements I want to emphasize. One is ancestors. And many of us have a false notion, a incomplete notion of ancestors. And it's warped, or the use of ancestors in Africa at this particular time. And it's warped by our Abrahamic faith or Western civilization center. So we're trying to understand things that don't have the same concepts in our cultures. And we're trying to evaluate these things in other cultures. And we have limited ability, or have had a limited ability, right? So when we think of ancestors as an American in 2021, wow, I got the date all messed up. As an American in 2021, right? When we think of ancestors, we think of those who have died, simply. Those who have lived and died, simply, right? But no, there are three elements in many of these societies. Like I said, this is a composite. You had those who have lived and died, so our common understanding. You have those who are living, us, right? And then those who are yet to be born, those who are yet to be born. Those three elements of ancestors. So you can see then how it could be a spiritual problem or perceived spiritually if a particular community or a particular family, a particular clan has a high rate of miscarriage. What is that saying? Right? The ancestors, those who are yet to be born, are unwilling to come into this physical realm through the wombs of that family. That particular person, that particular family, or that particular clan, or that particular community, depending on, the level of interaction of what that marriage represents, a marriage between whom, and in what position are they related or not related to one another, right? You can see also that be with gender ratios, right? Why aren't women willing to be born into that house, right? What's going on? Do they mistreat women? Is it spiritually imbalanced? The ancestors, there's a problem. Something's going on, right? It has to be rectified to even be considered, right? And all that was viewed through spirituality, right? Have circular time. We in the West, we use linear time, right? Meaning something happened 2 days ago, something happened after that, each hour that leads right up to now, to today. And it is all caused by what is led or come before, right? Spiritual time is like a spiral, like a slinky. It's the best way to describe it, as opposed to that straight linear line, right? And to grasp it or understand it, I use this example, and I borrow this from sci-fi to make it make better sense to you, right? Think of think of it as dimensions, right? We're in the same physical space, but we're operating in different dimensions, right? So in circular time, in theory, right? Someone on February 1st, 2021, sitting in the room that I'm recording this lecture, it's me. In the room with me is also, in this geographic space, right? People who were here and they're doing something at this moment, right? From 1921, February 1st, right? 1821, 1721, right? So then people in 3021, 3121, 3221, and et cetera, right? We're all occupying the same space, but in different dimensions. And through a proper spiritual worldview and spiritual practice, right? Which includes what? That's the broader culture, which also includes the rites and rituals, right? You can communicate with those other dimensions. And those activities and actions and people in those other dimensions can impact other dimensions, right? In this notion of spiritual time, right? Circular time, I should say, right? So that may even help you better understand the notion of ancestors and give you a better look into the worldview by understanding circular time and ancestors. Then that can help you with understanding socialization, politics, economics, and militarization. But then you also have the third part, the elements, right? And I'm not talking about it like this is Avatar Aang in The Last Airbender. Talking about the elements, how they were understood in Africa as opposed to Asia, right? So in those elements, right, you had the ground, the soil, and the things that grew out of them, right? The earth, right? And the things that grew out of them, that includes the trees and grass, right? That would include volcanic activity, earthquakes, right? Then you have water, right? That's the lakes, the rivers, the ponds, the oceans, the seas, right? Then you have the animals, right? You know, the actual living things. So that includes man as well, right? But animals, right? You know, these are part of the elements, right? And then you have the sky, right? The sky, right? So that's the stars, what we understand the stars, constellations, right? the heavenly bodies, as we call them, right? Where we of the Abrahamic faiths believe a heaven is, just like we believe hell is within earth, right? And we got this, you know, dichotomy of what is earth and what does it mean, and where, you know, right? And in this debate in the Abrahamic faith, the separation between heaven and earth, right? Well, they didn't have that separation, right? So you had those are the elements. So you can see, just considering the elements and viewing it as a spiritual realm. So when things happen, that means that the elements are unhappy with you. Just like sometimes it means the ancestors are unhappy with you, right? We're doing something wrong. We're not successful fishing. We're not successful in our farming, right? There's something wrong, right? You know, the fish are dead. We come to the shore and all the fish are dead. Why is this happening, right? Or it's not any fish around. You know, we're coming with all these problems and pestilences in our farming endeavors, right? Why is this happening? You know, and we see it in the Bible, in Quran, in Talmud, viewed through the Abrahamic faith, making sense of this. Things that are happening. Why are the locusts coming? We are punished by God, right? Understanding through the spiritual lens, right? They too the same thing. You can see then why for some communities mining wouldn't be something they were into, something they were opposed to, in fact, right? And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, isn't mining could be viewed as a violent act against the earth? You're committing violence against the earth, so i.e. then against the spiritual realm. Over hunting, over fishing, committing violence against the spiritual realm. It's supposed to be a balance, right? And then there's rites and rituals involved with hunting and killing and preparing the food, preparing the meat as a result of that. All those making sense, viewing all these things through the lens of spirituality. And then lastly, you have extraterrestrial. And I'm not talking about ET. I'm saying things that are beyond the terra, Earth, things that are beyond that. What is happening up there in that sky, right? Things that are beyond that, right? So the extraterrestrial, kind of like in the Abrahamic faith, the notion of angels and demons, right? They are from outside of earth, right? They come from heaven. Angels come from heaven. The demons are fallen angels, right? They come from heaven, right? They're extraterrestrial. Awesome. So that is the end of this lecture. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I hope it cleared up some things. Our next lecture will begin with discussing internal slaveries and slave trades in pre-colonial, pre-European contact Africa. That's really important. So that will set the stage of how and why the trade with the Europeans developed the way it did. It contributes strongly to the story, and more than likely a part of the story you've never heard before. So it has skewed your understanding of that trade. Awesome. Once again, my name is Dr. David Matthew Walton. Many people call me Kalanji, so some people call me Dr. Kalanji. This was Introduction to African American History Part 2, and I am an assistant professor at Western Carolina University and the inaugural director of Global Black Studies. Thank you for joining me, and I can't wait to talk to you next time.